All right, all right. Welcome to another edition of Grown Folks Business. So glad to be here and to share the space and time in these squares with Lisa and Greg. I'm sure Julia's going to slide in there at some point. Danya, thanks for doing what you do and keeping us above board and sounding and looking good for the internets. Um, Want to make sure recognize there, Julia. How you doing? Recognize our general compatriot Bob will be back, I think, next week from his long excursion into Mother Africa, and looking forward to getting him back in here to process some of the thoughts that I come up with that I think are worth sharing here. So, welcome, and I'll begin by kind of making sure I reference the fact that this is kind of a continuation of last week, not anywhere near in total percentage, not 100%, it is, but it is some of the things that we talked about, Lisa and I, last week, were concerning goal setting and such. And one of my favorite things to make sure I let people know and that I adhere to myself, ideology wise, is knowing your limitations. I think that's critically important to being not just someone who embraces what it is to be alive, but understands how to enjoy it, how to tolerate it without overextending or subjecting yourself to circumstances that are just not conducive to you being the best you. So, our conversation last night kind of led me to another stream of thought and coming up with some things to discuss tonight. And the topic is how much is too much? How long is too long? How do you know when it's time to move on from a project, person, or way of thinking? I think those three things, the project, person, or way of thinking, incorporate a large part of what we deal with in our general everyday life. So there's always something you got going on. There's always somebody you got to deal with. And if you're a conscious person, if you're someone who does looking inward, there is a thinking of how you think. There is a point at which you say, could I have done that better? Could I have dealt with that situation better? Did I make the right decision? Do I need to just kind of start over in the way I'm processing certain things that I'm dealing with? So I think this this is a good continuation of last week, Lisa. I hope you agree. I know you agree. You told me before we got started that it was like I was in your house and had heard some things you've been dealing with lately. So maybe we'll find some progress, Greg, in our thinking on this matter, and we'll figure out the best way forward for all of us. So, how much is too much? How long is too long? How do you know when it's time to move on from a project, person, or way of thinking? Um, that's a great question to start with in itself, and it's the one that you already have seen. The rest are kind of the questions I have are just kind of layered to continue the conversation. So let's begin. Lisa, I know you were chomping at the bit, so I'm gonna let you frame this conversation. Do I need to repeat the whole thing, or you got it right there where it is?
No, actually, as you were asking that question, the answer came to me, so I had to write it down so I didn't forget. Um, so the answer to the question that came to me was when the thing is causing more pain and drain than gain. Um, and I've recently had a conversation just yesterday with someone in reference to someone else, and they were saying you should help this person, and from the outside, it seems like that person should not want to be involved in that situation because they are experiencing some painful things. It is some abusive type situations. But my response to the person that was encouraging me to help that person was when that person decides that the pain is not worth what they're getting in return, is when they'll make a move. I can't do anything more for them than they're willing to do for themselves. But from my own perspective too. I've thought about some moves and shifts I've made. And when the pain was more than what I was gaining, I had to make some moves.
So I put a large emphasis on peace of mind, and that can be translated into some type of pain because there's no peace, then there's something disruptive. But I look for, in terms of people, uh, those who increase that calm, that peace. Even if there's friction, there's an understanding that we're trying to find that common ground or that peace together. But yeah, when someone is just a constant disruptor, that part is something that I can't process or deal with. So before I leave you, Lisa, is there a project that you could speak to or a way of thinking that hey, it was time for me to, let that go?
So one of the things that I was thinking about when I saw your topic was it's in a totally separate vein than one might think. My third child left to go to the Air Force on Tuesday. And the pain I was feeling, like I could barely get through working out at the Y. Like intermittently, I'm crying from him being gone, right? But I had to have some conversations in my head about letting go of the ideal that this is my child and having to release him as my child and say, this is a man that I gave all I had to raise him. And this is the culmination of what I put into him. So he's stepping into this independence. So I was having some, for lack of a better term, come to Jesus moments with myself it took some hours. I was at that gym for about 3 hours and going through a whole release process. And if you paid attention to my Facebook, I was listening to a song by, I think, Lee Brice over and over called I Drive Your Truck. And Jeremy happened to have brought his pickup truck over here on his way out. And I've just been driving his truck and thinking of him and transitioning, because that's been a serious thing to let go of this ideal that, oh, this is my child, this is my son. I really have to get into the vein of this is a man that I raised, and I'm now being a voyeur to his life, and I cannot be as emotionally invested in his movements.
That's a wonderful example. That's very, very layered example because of the intimacy that you don't want to detach yourself from, but and I guess the range in which he's going to be away, the distance is playing a large role in that too. And you got to be, looking at his truck, driving his truck, and checking in and seeing how he's doing. But that's a different type vantage point of you guys' relationship thus far. That's a big deal. I wish him well and hope to get some good positive updates. Greg and Julia, how do you know when it's time to move on from a project, person, or way of thinking?
Well, I guess first of all, I'd like to just acknowledge Lisa's example and story. Goodness gracious, that's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I'll take that with me for the rest of the week.
And really, what a gift you gave him. I mean, the fact that he made that decision speaks so much to your parenting, and what, you gave him the wings to be able to go, and it doesn't make it any easier, but kudos to you, Lisa. It speaks to your parenting a lot.
And how poetic to have that song talking about driving the truck.
Yeah.
It's, life is like that. It's poetic if we allow it to be. And it takes a real subtlety, a real sensitive ear and sensitive touch to life to touch into those things like that. The question of how much is too much. how too long, how much is too long, and what about a way of thinking. We are in the process right now in Davie County, a project that Julie and I have been working on and others, where there's been a transition. One of the leaders is moving on. And so we are at a point of deciding and needing to assess, clear headed, a way forward. How much is too much? And, and what is our thinking about what is our ultimate goal, or at least our philosophy behind this? And so I'm going to leave that with Julia because it's really her project, but I'm observing from the periphery.
Yeah. So what he's referring to is Fresh Hope, where we delivered food to the food insecure in several areas. And right before this pastor left, we started a whole nother area. And so it's like we got things started and he's gone. So what do we do? But what I'm going to bring up, and we're going to have to figure out, what is too much. We're already putting in, between the two of us, over 100 hours a week probably. But along with this, we were, and I may have shared this in the squares, but we were picking up at Lowe's one morning, and the receiving manager said, "There's a homeless couple in the parking lot. Can you do anything to help them?" I think people think because we do distribute food that we have all these connections, and we really don't. We know of the church that was in partnership with us in this. But the young man, it was a young Black couple, well, in their 30s, early 30s. And the young man especially is very charismatic, and we really took a liking to him. His name is Rico. And so we had no idea what we were doing. We brought him back to the airport and helped him get a shower and so forth. And then I contacted some people that I work with at the church, and we put him up in a hotel for a week, a Hampton Inn, nice hotel. And we put in our own money and so forth. And we tried all these places to find homeless shelters, and there's just not any in our area.
We're getting educated.
We are getting educated. We're getting a big education. So probably the best thing that could happen, they had a real toxic, I'm trying to narrow this down. They had a toxic relationship. They fight, make up, fight, make up. They're actually married. And it turns out she ended up going to jail for a fight she got into at Walmart. And he found a great place, Fifth Street Ministries in Greensboro. Statesville. And he was on a great path. He was getting regular counseling. He was on a structured program. They were going to help him find a job. He was getting regular meals. He had a place to sleep. And Gregory we talked to him almost every day and just encouraging him, stay the path, and you'll get work. Well, then he called and he said, well, I got back together with Annette and she got pregnant. So, Gregory was so good and he wanted money. We had to say, Gregory was so good. He said, we believe in you and we know you can do it, but you're making some really bad choices. And we had to say, call us when you're ready to make changes. And he's called a couple of other people we know asking for money, but he has not called us back. And that was so hard. He's such a likable guy, but, we could just see and so much of it's our system too. It's just heartbreaking to us, but we had to say enough is enough. And we don't have the skills or the finances to be able to support, nor do we want to enable, that kind of behavior. So that's been challenging.
That's an absolutely wonderful example, primarily because you incorporate a project in terms of what you desire to make the world look like and how to be helpful. But a person plays a significant role, especially when it gets to that lesser degree of separation. It's not just dropping off food; it becomes a more close and connected experience. And I'm total agreement with the majority of what you're saying. There's the spiral that you can be not a part of, and that someone or something can compel you into, and it's not exactly going to be controllable after a certain point. So you have to pay attention on the way towards that cliff, so to speak. And it's not to be dismissive of the person or whatever they're encountering or dealing with. It's at some point to protect you, because hey, misery loves company, and the cliff comes fast. You can be as helpful as you can, and next thing you know, you need help, and you weren't in need of help before you got to dealing with this situation or that individual person. Um, yeah, I'm someone who I hesitate to give up, especially on people. But my general resign of myself to certain ways of processing, moving, certain ideas that I adhere to, codes, what have you, philosophies and such. They allow me to interact with people in a way that kind of cuts through the BS, so to speak, and we get more to the nuts and bolts of situations, and you get to a point quicker of doing all that you feel you can do, as opposed to that incremental piece, Julia, where you do a little bit and then you do a little bit more, and then you say, well, if I did all of that, I should do this. And then, now they've just become so reliant on me for such and such, and that enabling thing, all of that can just become a situation where you're just overextending. You're giving way too much of yourself, and that person will go on and do something and look back at you and say, "What's wrong? What did I do to you?" And it's never realized by certain actors. But yeah, that spiral can be really real. Uh, you also brought up the relationship he's in, and that's not what we're going to focus on, not his personal experience, but you brought up one of my questions, actually, and that always happens. It's a good thing. So I'll skip over the one I was going to go to, and I'll ask this because you brought up the word toxic. And I'll come back to you, Greg and Julia, and you don't have to talk about that young man. This is just a question I had already come up with. Are toxic relationships really a thing, or can we save one another? So you alluded to what he was dealing with as it called it a toxic relationship. So yeah, that was one of my questions. Are they a real thing? And, or can we really save each other? So Greg and Julia.
Well, I think for sure it's a real thing. Opposites attract sometimes, and poisons attract sometimes, and enabling attracts sometimes. And just thinking about this couple since we brought them up, I had close encounters with them several times while they were at the Hampton Inn. I could not sleep at night. I would get up early in the morning and feel like there's got to be something that can be done, that I hadn't done enough. I have to care enough that I'm willing to get up and go. And I'm pretty conscious and aware of what enabling looks like. So I was monitoring myself, but I was also monitoring myself for detaching from the situation. Is there anything that I left undone, short of enabling, that I could have done? So I was being very careful. I'm not saying that I did it right. I'm just saying that I was aware of it and really cared about that. There was one day that I went there to the Hampton Inn. They had just come back. We had talked earlier in the day. I gave them a safe space at a church, This is a very hot period of time, by the way. So, very hot. We
July
actually
4th.
engaged ourselves July 4th to this couple because it was emergency. It was hot. They were hurt. They were tired. They were raw. And all we saw was an emergency. If we could just step in and give them a little relief, something good might come from it. Nothing was going to come from being that raw and that being hurt. So we had to do something. So we did. One day I had an earlier conversation with them at the church, which became our safe place or our meeting place. Shady, beautiful big trees. And they became a little more vulnerable and kind towards each other. And we talked. And we talked about how words matter and conversation matters, and how we show respect through our words and conversation matters. And so what I learned was they've had a pattern of not speaking well to each other and being unkind towards each other. So words matter to both of them. They both related stories about being hurt by the words of the other. So we talked about that, and it sounded good. Later that afternoon, I decided I'd go back to the Hampton Inn just to check on them because, and our name is kind of on the line too. They've been getting in trouble at the Hampton Inn. They were arguing. Their arguments were expanding beyond their room now. People were complaining about them being there, and we put them there. We paid for them being there. We're fronting that. So I walked out into the parking lot. I was sitting in the lobby waiting. They were not there. I waited. And I just decided to walk out into the parking lot. Just at that moment, they drove up. They got out of the car, and they both looked so happy. They were smiling. And they said, Greg, we were just talking about you. We were just talking about what you said, about talking kindly towards us. And we went to Tanglewood, a beautiful forest, wooded area, and we walked. I said, yes, that was a great choice. Get into nature. It's going to heal you. And so all of that was good. But to speak to your premise for tonight, Felton, all of that was put into the formula. But where did we go too far? How much did we do that should not have been done? I'm not sure. And if we did it all, we not only involved ourselves, but we involved friends and money. And I felt as long as they were willing to make the effort and work, we could take them out of an emergency, dire, dangerous situation because of the health issues and give them a little time that they could sort things out. The truth is, habits are stronger than will. And their habit of 17 years of fighting, we should have known that probably. And I look at it now. That should have been the telltale sign for us.
So this is the thing about that predictiveness. Maybe you're right. Or as I come to learn in my dealings with teams over the years and myself being an at-risk youth, sometimes you're not around when they do get it, Greg. And I think what you guys have spent the time imparting holds significant value. I don't think you can go back and count, we should have done this or shouldn't have done that, or maybe we did this or we did too much of that. Whatever they got the opportunity to experience during the period of time that you were in their lives, it's significant. You may not be here when that total appreciation changes the trajectory of where they're headed or seemingly headed, but you're a part of that journey. And at whatever point you decide you're done, at whatever point you decide you want to do more, that part of their journey will always include the time that they spent interacting with you two and the people that you introduced them to. I speak from experience of that, being at Dudley and up to no good, and knowing I owe a lot to a few people who really cared about me. When I got to mid to late 20s, I went and told them thank you. So you don't sometimes get to see it, but I got to go tell them thank you. And I've dealt with youth who I know will say, Mr. Felton, I just want to let you know whatever. And it ain't always the immediate gratification. You get to see the end of the story. Sometimes you don't, but you were a part of the story, man. So it's great that you guys do what you do anyway. And don't ever try to figure out the too much or too less at this point, because it's still an ongoing story. The progress is, the train's still moving.
That's good.
Yeah. Lisa, did you guys want to add anything else? You sure? Okay. Lisa, did you have a comment on the toxic relationship or can we save one another? And Greg, lastly, that idea of toxicity, to me, it places a hierarchy, and I'm not a believer in those. Yeah, sometimes people can't get along. They don't need to be together. And that can be reached as a conclusion without all of the drama and animus and emotions. And Lisa, you know how I am about emotions. It can be reached. It can just be reached as an understanding. We're not good for each other. It's a mutual thing. But when you apply toxicity, then you create this I'm too good for this person dynamic. And, sometimes the friends observe behaviors and they only see that one side. And then why are you still with that guy? Or why are you still with that girl? They're not good for you. I can't embrace a hierarchical framework because both people are participating. So sometimes just not good for each other. But yeah, I still like my question. I didn't mean to throw my question out the window, but I think we just, we're people, we got to be better communicators, and we got to reach those levels of, okay, this ain't working. I can tell you why. And even though if you say you're going to fix everything and you're going to do better, I'm just done. I don't have it in me to hang around, and it's okay. Lisa, yeah. So are toxic relationships really a thing, or can we save one another?
Well, yeah, you just contradicted your whole question, but I do have a rebuttal to that I don't think that assigning the toxic label demeans or devalues any individual. I believe you can have toxic interactions. And toxicity comes from a yucky mix of something, a yucky outcome based on the interaction. So I don't see it as hierarchical. And what's funny is a very good friend of mine ended up telling me that their therapist said I was toxic. Yeah, I see your mouth open, right? I was like, what? But that friend ended up saying, well, and that therapist told that friend she should discontinue having a relationship with me. But the friend, to some extent, said she could see how the therapist was hearing her point of view based on our interactions. So she didn't really wholeheartedly buy into that, but I did notice some sense of, well, you're making me feel bad. So it's something bad about this, talking about, some things that I say and how I move around makes her feel bad. So it's she could grasp some truth to a toxic interaction, but I decided that, and that did hurt my feelings. Okay, I'm gonna be clear. That hurt my feelings because I'm like, wow, I try to think I'm the least toxic person I know because I try to measure my words and I try to hug everything out. But in the same sense, I was not being conscious of how my direct delivery of things was being interpreted by a vulnerable person. So that person was vulnerable emotionally, and I wasn't recognizing that level of vulnerability. So when I'm coming across to her, she's feeling, or she was feeling attacked, or what was one of the other words she said? Condescending, like I was being and me in my just me trying to be me, and I'm not conscious of that. I wasn't paying attention to that. Okay. I wasn't paying attention to that person. If you ask me a question, I'm going to be as honest as I can and as sensitive as I can with an answer, but I wasn't paying attention to that person. But I also didn't take on that toxicity label because I know I'm not toxic. But that happened within the last 6 months. And I still hadn't gotten over that experience, because I felt like, wow, I'm probably one of the best positive influences in this person's life. And so I'm still being measured and guarded as to how I interact with this person because of that label. But on the flip side of that, I've had toxic romantic relationships. And even when I'm like, okay, I can't do this, it gets too aggressive, it gets too threatening, and it just doesn't feel good when things go bad. So it's not like, oh, let's sit down and talk. It just goes really bad. And PTSD, aggressiveness, aggression, that kind of thing. But then you want to say, okay, this is not a good interaction. And the toxicity comes where it's so much yuck, the damage that's done. So I do believe in that there is a thing in respect to toxic relationships. And I do not believe we can save each other. If you have open people that are willing to do some give and take and that introspection, but you can't save anyone who is not willing to be saved, even if you're open and caring and all that other stuff.
1000% agree. The way that I was presenting it has to include people who really desire to figure it out, not just a complete and total jerk. And the jerk can be the in-between, the area in between the relationship. But you did kind of confirm what I was getting at overarchingly when I was saying, you created imbalance or a hero and a villain type dynamic based on your friend's description of you to this therapist. You become a problem, but you're a human being. That hierarchical, well, that's the issue. You need to go, get rid of her. That's the problem. And that part is kind of what I'm against. Just this regret, this trying to figure out why it went a certain way. And don't get me wrong, everybody does that. We have that moment of reflection where it's like, as Greg was alluding to, how much could we have done more? How much did we do enough? You do that, but you can't linger there. And you can't find no real answers in that. None. Because what is it? Woulda, coulda, shoulda, and ifs and buts had babies, and maybe, all that stuff. You just, you can't, you can look at it and massage it a little bit and say, hey, if you're still in it, you can even go try some of those things. But when you're done, man, you got to just be done and, wish them well and say hello when you see them and, maybe check on them every now and then. And sometimes that takes work. One of my ex-girlfriends, it took us some years because I remain accessible. I never just abandoned any relationship that I think was meaningful. We may not we're not going to make it. We're not going to be, 50 years of marriage. But if I spend a substantial period of time of my life with you, I want to know you're okay at certain points. And it's okay if I'm finding out you found the Prince Charming and you good. That's great. But some people not even, capable of that. So me and this ex, we were like not thinking I would have talked to her ever again. And then the ice thawed, and we had really good in-depth conversations, some about why our relationship didn't work out, but we were able to have, and we're able to have now, more meaningful interactions. Because you get some of that emotional stuff out of the way, some of that baggage and some of that stuff that just doesn't allow for you to really see each other. All you see is all of the stuff that was wrong. You don't clear the path to see the actual individual and other human being you're dealing with, because it's another person. It's not everything that you ascribe to them. They're a person. So yeah, I'll get off my soapbox. I'm going to move on to the next question. How often do you acknowledge that it's you and not them? That goes back to that way of thinking situation. How much is too much and how long is too long? Sometimes you got to turn the mirror around on yourself and kind of say, I've got to deal with this situation a little differently. I think everybody on here has probably had a regular 9 to 5, right? And it might have been one that you freaking hated. Might have been one that you just were like, I don't want to go to work at this place because this person gets on my nerves. This person over here, they never do this. So I was experiencing that on 1000 back when I was working in manufacturing and printing. I mean, it was just constant. The guy come in behind, leave the press in the area crappy. Co-workers that just annoy you. And I knew if I didn't do something different, because it was me that was encountering all of that, they weren't tasked with acknowledging what they were doing or dealing with. They don't have to. I don't know what they got at home, but I'm coming into a space that I know I have to make sure I do something about how I interact in that space. So it becomes me more than them. Headphones became, some of my best friends in that. That was a good answer. You got to the point where you just keep an earbud or two in and you're like, oh, I'm listening to this, and you limit the conversation. But there were other tactics too. But I just knew at that point I had to say it was on me, and it was me that needed to do something in that situation. It wasn't them. You can't come up into a situation. I used to teach this with the youth when it comes to conflict resolution. One of the things I always say, the only person in any situation you can control is yourself. That's it. You cannot run up into any type situation and say, I'm going to make them do what I want them to do. No, that's not how it works. The only person you can control is yourself. All of your actions right there. Let's go to Greg and Julia first. If the question is still there, it's how often do you acknowledge it's you and not them?
I always think that's a good first step when we have any kind of issue with anybody. What's my lesson here? What can I change about the relationship? Like you said, it's got to start. We can't control how they act. So is there anything we can do to change the dynamic? And if there's not, move on and acknowledge that. But like you said, Felton, and in the past, I was way more emotional than I am now. I'm thoroughly with you on, have conversations, move. I always say, move the energy up, move it to here, and not react, think. And we both work on that, in our relationship. Are we reacting or are we responding? And just having the conversation, but look at ourselves first.
Interesting. We had a conversation. Julia and I went for a walk this morning, and we had a talk about having critical thoughts about other people. And it's not necessarily the same thing as what you're bringing up, Felton. in a work situation where people are just not really pulling their weight and they're misbehaving, they're not doing well. This is more along the lines of just finding fault, criticizing other people, and realizing that that's really a reflection of what we're finding fault in ourselves. And that is such a dramatic and helpful tool to see, to turn that around and say, okay, so this is, I'm criticizing this person, I'm finding fault with this person for this thing. Well, what if I was to accept it in myself? What if it was this thing in myself that I'd like to see change, that I deem unnecessary or hurtful or holding me back in some way? So went through a series of relationships and friends that I find fault with, and it was clear that if I just took that one step removed and said, oh, this means that this is what it means for me, that if I was to make this change, if I was to accept it, it's about me, that the reflection coming from the other person was a very helpful thing. So rather than it happening to me, it was happening for me. And that's not a trick of the mind. That's a real thing. It sounds like it's tricky business, and it probably is, because we can trick ourselves. But if we can just get into that space that, oh yeah, it's about me. It's not about them. I'm making it sound like it's about them, but it's about me. And then that's where the progress begins. We leave our friends behind. We let them go. They're off the hook. It wasn't about them. It was about us.
Now, that's a wonderful, wonderful observation. Two things, and one of them, Julia, what is it? Let the energy come up, or redirect the energy, however you said it, about, moving the emotional energy up here. Let's think about this thing and let's process it. But yeah, Greg, I mean, if you take a step back from certain situations, and especially as you stated, you look at a couple of different relationships, and just that one little thing you could have done, or the one little thing you can now incorporate. What you sometimes find out, and I take, I have a little humor in this, the expectativeness of you to be who you always been can throw somebody else off. And that's where the little trick that you're talking about seemingly is being played, but you're working on yourself. And, they are interacting with the person who's actually acknowledging in real time, I have things that I can do to make this relationship better, more healthier, I think, based on my observation. So that's what I'll incorporate. And yeah, sometimes they'll just be expecting you to do what you normally do. And you're like, that's not what just happened. I'm listening to you. I'm being quiet. I'm really trying to, figure out where we're going in this. And I want to understand you. I really want to understand you. And they'll sometimes just fall back into those old habits and just try to say, no, that's not what you're doing. You're doing this. You're trying to be funny. No, I'm really trying to be here and with you in this moment. So yeah, I agree with you, Greg. That's a good.
That's a great example, Felton, because it does fall back on them, and not in a negative sense, but there's a space, there's a vacuum that opens up. You're no longer playing the game. You are taking responsibility for yourself, and that leaves them free to do the same.
That is absolutely correct. It leaves them free to do the same, and we can get the energy here and progress up this ladder and stop fighting over the rungs. Like, we can do that. But yeah, it is a conscious exercise. It is something that that you're delving in. I'm going to do this differently than I have done before. Because as they say, the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over and expect different results. So why do we go to these same arguments, fuss, fight, know how it's going to go? How about we make a left instead of that right we always make, and see, find some different area to explore. Agreed. I think that was a wonderful observation. Lisa, how often do you acknowledge it's you and not them?
Not often enough. And I will address something you said in reference to continuing some interactions with previous relationships. I don't have that habit. And I think it's because of my feeling of vulnerability, and that I don't want to get caught back up. And I'm feeling like I may forget the pain or forget why we're not together. And I that's just a practice I had all of my life. I didn't go back with somebody and decide that. It's just something I decided as a coping mechanism, with the exception of my ex-husbands, who are the fathers of my children. And when I say not often enough, and this is another part to this this topic, is yesterday I had to call my first husband and apologize to him for being hateful with him on Saturday. And we've been divorced 20 years, almost 21 years, and I have 4 children with him. And I had to do some introspection as to why do I get so angry so quick when I don't feel like we can co-parent or whatever. So what I ended up figuring out is that I'm still angry at the loss of the ideal. And I lost the opportunity for the family I was trying to get. And I wasn't recognizing that, because when I'm trying to engage him around these kids, and it did involve that 24-year-old leaving and me trying to talk to him, and he wasn't as checked in, and then that upset me. So, like, why is that upsetting you? Because if we'd have still been married, if we'd have still been together, we'd have been able to manage our family differently. And because we have so many kids, and because we do have kids, I'm not able to cut him off like I would like to cut him off. So I'm feeling trapped. I was still feeling trapped to engage with somebody that I didn't have what it was I was wanting when we first were together. But this hasn't dawned on me in 21 years. So if we have an exchange and I get upset at his reaction, and it's weird, I had texted him to say, can you help me get the kids together to go to San Antonio for Jeremy's graduation, October 13th. And I didn't get any response, like nothing, from 7 o'clock in the morning. And then I called twice and I didn't get any response. And then I ended up calling some hours later. And he was like, well, you know me, you should have known that meant I did it. What level of communication is that? And I'm sitting up here scratching my head, and I'm like, who would know that? So and so that just upset me, right? Because I'm like, God, I gotta deal with this dude. Like, and so I really had to sit back and say, what really makes me angry? I'm angry that he's not my husband anymore. I'm angry that I'm still forced to deal with him, even though we have this thing, and I have an expectation and he doesn't meet it, But 21 years, it didn't dawn on me that I have still been mourning the loss of what coulda, shoulda, woulda been. And I wasn't able to do him like any other person I dated and say, change my number, block them, never talk to them again, if that makes sense, because I will do that quick.
So I do, I like that as an observation, because for one, it kind of goes back to what Gregory and Julia were discussing in terms of the friends of theirs that they tried to help and assist. You don't get to see it sometimes, but look at Lisa giving us an instant example of 20 some years. And she realized that now, Greg, I don't know what was the catalyst, but she realized after 20 some years, I need to apologize to him because I am really giving him all of my water. This is my baggage, my water. He may not be remotely thinking about this the same way I am. And I recognize that. That's a beautiful thing, Lisa. And that's now, again, back to what Greg was talking about, that yourself, that thing that you change within yourself, as long as you commit to it, it becomes more of a thing. So I guarantee you you'll run into that situation with him that we were just discussing that he won't know how to deal, because it's like, but she usually does this, and that's just not what you do anymore. You've processed something that, I've been dealing with this the same way for 20 some years. Why? I'll do it differently. And if you adhere to it and commit to it, he's gonna be like, well, damn, maybe we should get married again. All right, okay. I'm going into the last question, and this is just say it. Hopefully, it's something that you can process instantaneously. I think you guys are pretty quick with it. So, Lisa, I'll start with you. What does recalibration mean to you?
Ooh, what I did, right, is stop. Wait a minute. If you don't like that result, but you really do have to stop and figure out where that result is coming from, and then resign to make a change if you don't want to keep getting that same thing, and to have that thought that you can't go back, you can't change things, and then really intentionally make the changes from that recalibration. So recalibrating something to do the same thing is not recalibration, right? It's doing that same thing. So, and it means a lot. It means a lot to me because I don't want to keep having those same yucky results. So, yes.
Love it. Love it. What about you, Greg and Julian? What does recalibration mean to you?
That is so awesome, Lisa. I mean, to think that you changed a habit that's 21 years old, that's awesome. I mean, that we're not too old to change. So it's taking the pause, just pause. For me, it's getting out of the emotions, going to the mental, and asking myself some questions, that taking the time to pause. We don't have to respond right then. We don't have to, we can just take a break and breathe.
So all of that is exactly what I would have said. And then add to that, there's a difference between responding emotionally and reacting emotionally. So if we can respond mentally and hold the emotions at bay, that we're going to serve the other, we're going to serve ourselves, we're going to serve the situation, and we're going to open it up for better solutions. So hold the emotions back, recognize what they are, and respond mentally. And that's easier said than done. We know that. This is the human experience. But gosh,
all it is. Yeah.
Lisa, you are an inspiration. Felton, you are an inspiration. Julia is a constant inspiration for me to do just that.
Yeah, I well said. The human experience is to be lived and appreciated. So I'm here for that. I often think of recalibration in these terms. It's never too late to be who you thought you were. So if you're here and you're occupying space and breathing air, if you have aspirations to be somebody that's better, to be somebody that you would like to be around, because what we've kind of glossed over is that knowing thyself, sometimes you only like being around yourself. So if you can recognize that there are things that you can do internally to make yourself someone that you like or love, it's never too late to be who you thought you were. Recalibrate and make it happen. You guys have a wonderful evening. I always appreciate the time and space. This is so it's nurturing for me. It's a really great place to be, and I'm glad to know the people in the squares, and look forward to seeing you guys again in the next few. I really do. I appreciate you all. Shalita, react always with love. Great comment. Beautiful picture too, Shalita. Good to see you. All right, Greg, you have something you want to add before we get out of here?
I like the word that you use, Felton, about nurturing. I feel the energy of nurturing this evening. And I think it comes from sharing and acknowledging and being real. And I think all of us were tonight.
Thank you, Lisa and Felton. And Danya, thank you. And your haircut looks great.
Absolutely. Look, Greg, I got to take us back maybe last year, man. You asked a question and you pointed with it. You said, "What are we doing here? What's this about? What are we here for?" It's what you just said. Man. It's literally what you just said. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing, man, and thanks for hanging around. Is the years of change that's been, man. Thanks for being here. That's exactly what it's about.
Thank you.
You all have a wonderful evening. Greatly appreciate y'all. Take care. Internets, have a wonderful night and enjoy what is going to be a mild and gorgeous weekend. I mean, get some fresh air, get outside, get some nature. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.